Hello friends. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My first day at Iron Cliff State Penitentiary began on a gray Tuesday in February 2023. The kind of winter morning where the cold doesn't just bite, it waits. The air felt heavy, damp, like it had been sitting inside those concrete walls for decades, absorbing everything that had ever happened there. I was 25, freshly sworn in, badge still too shiny, boots not yet broken in. I had graduated near the top of my class at the Corrections Academy, filled with the kind of confidence instructors warn you about, but secretly expect you to grow out of. Iron Cliff sat just outside Riverton, Ohio, a town that lived off prison jobs and truck stops. From the highway, the facility looked like a sleeping beast, low, wide, wrapped in razor wire that glistened like frost-bitten teeth. They hired me fast. Too fast. The usual background clearance backlog was temporarily waived, according to HR. At the time, I saw opportunity. Now, I see desperation. My then partner, Mara, had told me not to take the job. She said prisons didn't just lock people inside. They leaked. That whatever lived in those walls eventually followed you home. I laughed it off. Told her I wanted purpose. Told her someone had to keep order. She moved out before summer. They assigned me to Unit Delta B, maximum custody. Long-term inmates. Men who had learned patience the way monks learned silence. My supervisor was Lieutenant Raymond Keller, a heavy-set man with a permanent squint and a voice worn down by decades of shouting through steel. He walked me through the unit like he was listing storm damage. East Row, lifers. South Corridor, repeat violent offenders. Don't linger. Don't talk more than you need to. Then we stopped. Cell B39. That one, Keller said, lowering his voice just slightly. Elliot Harrow. He didn't elaborate, just stared at the cell a moment longer than necessary. 30 years inside. No write-ups, no fights. Psych review says high intelligence, low emotional reactivity. He looked at me then. Don't mistake calm for safe. Elliot Harrow didn't look like a nightmare. Late 50s, gray hair cut close, wire-rimmed glasses, calm posture. His cell was spotless, too spotless. Books neatly stacked, pages marked with scraps of folded paper. Philosophy. Behavioral science, old legal texts. When I passed for the first time, he looked up from his book and nodded once. Not friendly, not hostile. Acknowledgement. I remember thinking how normal he seemed, how human. That thought almost ruined my life. The first 6 weeks passed quietly. In Delta B, that was unusual. I learned patterns, when tempers spiked, which inmates avoided eye contact, which ones stared too long. And somehow, Elliot always seemed to know before I did. You might want to check on Grayson in B12 today, he said once, casually, like commenting on the weather. He hasn't been sleeping. I checked. Grayson had received notice that his parole hearing was denied again. He was shaking, punching the wall, 10 minutes from losing control. Another time, Elliot mentioned a disagreement brewing between two inmates who weren't even housed near each other. Sure enough, recreation had to be rescheduled to prevent a fight. My incident reports dropped. Supervisors noticed. I was told I had instincts. I thought I was learning. I didn't realize I was being trained. By month 3, I started stopping at Elliot's cell during slower rounds. He never initiated conversation. He waited. That was the trick. He asked about my life outside, remembered details, asked follow-up questions weeks later, listened without interrupting. I told him about Mara, about the isolation, about how friends stopped calling once they realized my schedule meant missing holidays and birthdays. "You're adjusting," he said once. "That loneliness is the price of responsibility." It felt wise. It felt earned. He told me about his son, now grown, living somewhere on the West Coast, unaware his father was still alive. His voice trembled just enough to feel real. I believed every word. The favors started small, passing a note, delivering a book, carrying a message to medical. Nothing against policy, nothing obvious. I read the notes. They were harmless. Encouragement, quotes, condolences. But something changed. Inmates began stepping aside when I walked through the corridor. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. A man named Calvin Roach, notorious for assaulting guards years earlier, nodded at me once. I mistook fear for respect. I didn't realize I had become a symbol. The first death happened in June. An inmate named Marcus Delaney was found dead in the shower. Shank wound to the neck. Brutal. Fast. Delaney had been a predator. Known. Protected by favors and silence. The official ruling was self-defense. Another inmate took the fall willingly. I mentioned it to Elliot. "Some men are storms," he said, "and some storms need to pass." I didn't understand that was a confession. The second death was worse. A correctional officer, Officer Paul Merrick. Cruel but careful. The kind who knew exactly how far he could push before paperwork became dangerous. He was found beaten to death in the staff parking lot. No cameras caught it. No witnesses. The assumption was retaliation. I attended the memorial and felt nothing. I told Elliot. He said, "Guilt doesn't always mean you're wrong. Sometimes it means you're honest." I wrote it down. That notebook was later logged as evidence. Everything collapsed in September. An inmate named Victor Lang, a lifer, was found dead in his cell. Poisoned. Lang had been cooperating with federal investigators. He was 2 weeks from testifying. The prison locked down. State and federal agents arrived. Not prison people. Outsiders. They followed the trail. The poison passed through multiple hands. Inmates who didn't know each other. Guards who never spoke directly. But all the communication intersected. One node. Cell B39. Elliot Harrow. I was brought in for questioning. Agent Rebecca Sloan laid out the timeline. The messages. The favors. My name appeared again and again. Not as a suspect. As a tool. Elliot had been running Iron Cliff for years. Eliminating threats. Removing abusers. Shaping behavior. Without ever leaving his cell. I asked to see him. I don't know why. He looked amused. Proud. "You were effective," he said. "That's rare." I demanded to know why. "Control," he replied. "That's the only currency here." I resigned 3 days later. Elliot was transferred to a federal supermax. They told me he'd never rebuild his network. I want to believe that. But some nights, I still hear his voice, teaching patience, teaching timing, teaching how power doesn't need violence, only understanding. I work construction now. Open air. Sky overhead. And I know now the fear I saw in those inmates' eyes was never meant for me. It was for the man who never needed a door to leave his cell. Because the prison was already inside all of us. The coffee beside me had gone cold long before I noticed the pattern in his breathing. It was April 2017, a detail I remember with uncomfortable clarity because my son had turned 7 just a few days earlier. His birthday sticker, a crooked astronaut peeling at the edges, was still stuck to my laptop, placed there by his small hands like a badge of pride. At the time, my life felt stable, predictable. I believed I understood danger. That belief would not survive the month. I had been working as a criminal behavior journalist for nearly 12 years, long enough to recognize the difference between grief and performance, fear and imitation. After graduating from Northwestern University in 2005, I built my career writing deep behavioral analyses, stories that explored how predators thought, not just what they did. Prosecutors read my work, professors assigned it, detectives occasionally resented it. That morning, I was sitting in a windowless conference room at the Creston County Sheriff's Department, a low brick building tucked into rural southern Ohio, across from a man named Daniel Mercer. Officially, Daniel was a witness. Unofficially, 15 minutes into the interview, I knew I was sitting across from something far more dangerous than the man currently awaiting trial in Toledo. Daniel had agreed to speak with me about his former roommate, a suspect accused of murdering 3 women across Lucas County. From the outside, Daniel was cooperative, polite, unremarkable. Mid-40s, office job posture, clean hands, no visible nervousness. But then I noticed the timing. Every time I finished speaking, Daniel tilted his head exactly 2 seconds later. Not 1, not 3. His eyes followed a fixed pattern. Mouth, hands, eyes. Mouth, hands, eyes. Like a program running behind glass. When I mentioned the victims, Renee, Marla, and Joanne, his face arranged itself into sympathy. Brow furrowed, lips downturned, head shake. But it arrived late, a fraction of a second too late, like a badly dubbed foreign film. I had interviewed killers, survivors, grieving families, and liars. Genuine emotion was chaotic, messy. Daniel's reactions were precise, rehearsed, controlled. I realized then that Daniel Mercer was not feeling empathy. He was displaying it. And the thought that followed, quiet and chilling, was worse. Maybe he knew I could tell. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. Daniel spoke about his childhood in Dayton, his career in insurance auditing, his discovery of newspaper clippings hidden under his roommate's bed. He described shock, sleepless nights, moral conflict. But his body betrayed nothing. His breathing never changed, 14 breaths per minute, steady as a metronome. His pupils did not dilate when recounting surprise. His pulse, visible at the neck, remained calm. I had trained under micro-expression analysis for years. Surprise was involuntary. Fear leaked. Stress spilled. Daniel leaked nothing, because there was nothing to leak. He had known about those clippings long before he claimed to find them, possibly before they existed. At the end of the interview, I asked how he felt about testifying. For the first time, he paused, a real pause. "I think about consequences a great deal," he said softly. "Every action leaves a wake." He smiled, only his mouth moved. No eye crinkle, no muscle engagement beyond the zygomaticus major. A manufactured smile. I drove back to my hotel in silence, replaying the audio again and again. Something about his voice lingered. Not threatening, not emotional. Curious, as if he had learned something new. About me. I published the article 6 weeks later in the Atlantic Review, carefully anonymized, titled, "The Witness Who Knew Too Much." I made no direct accusations. I focused on behavioral anomalies, emotional poverty, delayed effect. The response was immediate. Psych departments circulated it. Editors praised it. Readers called it unsettling. I didn't think about Daniel Mercer. That was my first mistake. The first letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon. It was addressed to my home, not my office, not my P.O. box. My house in suburban Evanston, Illinois, where I lived with my husband, Nathan, and our son, Caleb. Plain white envelope, no return address. Postmarked Columbus, Ohio. Inside was one typed page, 14 breaths per minute. You were counting. I was counting too. You touch your ring finger when you are nervous. You did it 6 times. We are observers, you and I. Don't pretend you don't enjoy being seen. No signature. There didn't need to be one. The police came, took the letter, offered reassurance. No immediate threat. Probably a disturbed reader. Nathan wanted cameras installed that night. I said we should wait. I wanted to believe this was coincidence. The second letter arrived 4 days later. Different postmark, Indianapolis. Same typeface. Your kitchen curtains don't meet in the center. I stood outside at 7:12 p.m. while you cooked pasta. Caleb hummed while coloring. You called your sister. You mentioned me. Observation is intimacy, isn't it? That night, Nathan installed cameras. Blackout curtains replaced every window covering. I took leave from work. I started researching Daniel Mercer. He did not exist online. No social media, no digital trail. One corporate newsletter photo from 2010, half hidden behind coworkers, always partially obscured. Even then, he had known how to be present without being seen. The third letter arrived on Caleb's birthday. Hand-delivered. No stamp. Inside a card with cartoon dinosaurs. 7 years old today. He has your eyes. Curious eyes. You made something beautiful. I only dismantle. Perhaps you could explain the difference. I vomited in the bathroom until my vision blurred. We left that afternoon. We hid at a cabin near Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. No neighbors. No cell service. No address given to anyone. For 3 days, nothing happened. On the 4th morning, I walked to the dock. A note waited under a stone. 14 breaths per minute. Calm suits you. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't pursuit. This was play. And running was part of it. I stopped reacting. I contacted the FBI. An agent named Marisol Vega took the case. We built a profile. Daniel had been following me for months before the interview. He orchestrated the connection, attended conferences I spoke at, read everything I published. I hadn't found him. He had selected me. When they arrested him in October, they found a storage unit. Hundreds of photographs, maps, schedules, transcriptions. He wasn't obsessed. He was curating. Daniel Mercer is serving 12 years in federal custody. Parole eligible soon. I still count my breath sometimes. 14 when calm, 18 when I remember his smile. I no longer write about monsters. Because I learned something the hard way. Understanding them doesn't protect you. It just means you recognize the teeth sooner. Everyone around me used to say the same thing. You deserve someone who treats you right. After years of half-commitments, emotional unavailability, and one relationship that quietly dismantled my confidence piece by piece, I had started believing maybe I was the problem. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe stability was just something other people were built for. So when Ryan Caldwell walked into my life, it felt less like coincidence and more like relief. I was 26 years old, working as a paralegal at a mid-sized law firm in Austin, Texas, still learning how to trust my own instincts again. August of 2017 had been brutally hot, the kind of heat that makes the city feel slower, heavier. That Saturday morning, I stopped by a small coffee shop near my apartment on South Congress, the kind with chipped mugs and handwritten chalkboard menus. Ryan was sitting alone at a corner table, reading a thick philosophy book I didn't recognize. When I reached for napkins and accidentally bumped his table, knocking his coffee dangerously close to the edge, I froze, already apologizing. He looked up and smiled, not rushed, not annoyed, patient. He apologized to me, even though I was clearly at fault. Then he offered to buy me another coffee, even though mine hadn't spilled. He asked my name like it mattered, like he intended to remember it. That conversation lasted 3 hours. We talked about childhoods, ambitions, fears we rarely said out loud. He asked questions that felt thoughtful, intentional. When I mentioned my father passing away 2 years earlier, his expression softened in a way that made my chest ache. He reached across the table, held my hand, and didn't rush to fill the silence. He just let me feel understood. I drove home that afternoon convinced I had finally met the person I was supposed to be with. Ryan said he worked in business consulting, which explained the travel. Sometimes he'd be gone for days, occasionally a full week. He always called around 11 p.m. when he was away, his voice calm and reassuring, telling me about airports, hotel rooms, clients with impossible demands. Those calls became the highlight of my nights. The first few months felt unreal. He remembered tiny details I mentioned in passing. He showed up with my favorite flowers on random weekdays. He never made me feel silly for being emotional or needy. When work overwhelmed me, or grief crept back in, he held me and said exactly the right thing. My friends loved him. My mother started making subtle comments about grandchildren. I started imagining a future, our wedding, kids, a quiet house outside the city. Ryan introduced me to his family over video calls, a distant mother living in Florida, a quiet brother named Marcus who barely spoke. He said his family was complicated, emotionally distant. I understood. Mine wasn't perfect either. 6 months in, he handed me a key to his apartment and told me he had never felt this way about anyone. Holding that key felt like healing. The first crack came quietly around month 8. We were out to dinner with my coworker Beth and her husband. At some point, I joked about Ryan being terrible at cooking. Everyone laughed. Even Ryan smiled. But on the drive home, he went silent. When I asked what was wrong, he didn't answer at first, just stared at the road. Then, in a calm, even voice, he explained that I had embarrassed him, that I'd made him look incompetent, that a partner was supposed to build you up, not tear you down in public. I apologized immediately, caught off guard. By the time we got home, he was back to normal, making tea, asking about my day like nothing happened. I told myself I'd been careless, but something about the way he delivered those words stayed with me. There was no anger, no raised voice, just something rehearsed, precise, like he'd said it before, like he knew exactly how it would land. After that, patterns started appearing. Ryan was warm and attentive when I was happy, when I was affectionate, when I made him feel needed. But whenever I was upset about something unrelated to him, he became distant. Once, after a devastating day at work, where a case I'd spent months on collapsed, I called him crying. He listened quietly, then asked if I'd picked up his dry cleaning. When I said I forgot, he sighed, said he understood. But there was disappointment in his voice that made me feel guilty for being upset at all. So I stopped calling him when I was sad. I learned to perform happiness. My friends noticed I was quieter, less animated. When they asked if everything was okay, I said yes, because I didn't have the language yet to explain what was happening. The lies unraveled in March, almost a year in. Ryan left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he showered. I wasn't snooping, not at first, but the screen lit up with a message notification from someone named Kara, a heart emoji beside her name. I stood there, frozen, telling myself not to click. Then I did. The messages went back months. She called him baby, asked when he was coming back, talked about missing him in her bed. There were photos I wish I could erase from my mind. When Ryan came out of the shower, he didn't panic. He didn't yell. He looked sad, like I'd betrayed him by discovering the truth. He told me Kara was an unstable ex, that he was trying to end things gently. He cried, held my face, swore I was the only one he loved. I wanted to believe him, but something had shifted. Over the next few weeks, I dug deeper. I found another woman in Dallas who thought she was his girlfriend, another in Houston who had been sending him money for a business investment that didn't exist. His consulting job had been real, but he'd been fired 8 months earlier. Every business trip had been a lie. I found a lawsuit from 2014 for fraud, a different last name tied to a professional profile with his photo. The man I loved wasn't real. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He told me I was the only one who truly knew him, that leaving now would destroy him, that walking away would be cruel. I stayed 3 more months, not because I was stupid, but because psychological manipulation doesn't feel dangerous while you're inside it. He turned every confrontation back on me, said I was paranoid, that my past trauma was ruining something beautiful. He cried so much that I ended up comforting him. He started monitoring where I went, who I talked to, how fast I replied to texts. He called it concern, love, fear of losing me. The isolation happened slowly. I stopped seeing friends, stopped calling my mom regularly. Ryan never forbade it. He just made it uncomfortable enough that avoiding everyone felt easier. I lost weight. I stopped sleeping. Some mornings, he was loving and warm. Other mornings, cold and distant, making me feel like I'd done something wrong without telling me what. I kept chasing the version of him from that coffee shop, the version that never existed. The breaking point came on a Sunday in June. I went to brunch with Beth, forgot to tell Ryan. When I came home, he was sitting in the dark. He didn't yell. He asked questions. Calm, controlled, accused me of cheating, took my phone. When I reached for it, he shoved me into the wall. Not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to warn me. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't in a relationship. I was in a cage. I planned my escape in secret. I hid cash, memorized routes, reached out to Beth, changed passwords, learned about restraining orders. For 2 weeks, I played the perfect girlfriend. Then he left for a trip to Phoenix. The moment his car disappeared, I packed. I left everything behind that might make him think I'd return. I left a note. I am done. He called relentlessly, cried, threatened, promised change. Then one day, silence. I never heard from him again. I don't know where he went. I'm 30 now, still cautious, still listening for the signs. Because the most terrifying thing about a psychopath isn't the violence, it's how safe they make you feel, right before you disappear. My neighbors never checked on me, and I preferred it that way. My house sat at the very end of Burwood Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac outside Cleveland, Ohio, where people waved politely but never lingered. Lawns were trimmed, Porch lights came on at the same time every evening. Nobody asked questions they didn't want answered. I had lived there alone for almost 10 years. I graduated from Lakewood High School in 2007, which meant I'd spent most of my adult life watching other people move forward. Marriages, kids, promotions, while I stayed exactly where I was. My mother died when I was 11. My father drank himself into the ground before I finished high school. My older brother, Darren, overdosed in a gas station bathroom somewhere off I-75 before I turned 25. By the time October 2024 arrived, silence wasn't loneliness to me. It was structure. I worked remotely as a data entry contractor, ordered groceries online, and spoke to other human beings maybe once or twice a month. The house I grew up in became my entire world, and I convinced myself that isolation was stability. That Wednesday morning started like any other. I woke up around 6 to the furnace kicking on and the old pipes groaning behind the walls. I brewed coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used since college and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. Outside, the sky was flat Ohio gray, the kind that drains color from everything. I remember thinking the house felt colder than usual. There was a draft I couldn't explain. When I walked through the living room, I noticed the basement door was cracked open. I always kept that door shut. My father used to say basements collected bad memories. Even years after he died, I avoided going down there unless I had to. I pushed the door closed, heard the latch click, and told myself the frame had warped with the temperature. Old houses do that. At least, that's what I told myself. Around 9, I went downstairs to refill my coffee. The basement door was open again. Not cracked this time. Wide open. Darkness spilled into the hallway like a stain. I stood there longer than I should have, my mug halfway to my mouth, trying to understand how something so ordinary could feel so wrong. The latch worked. I knew it did. I'd heard it click. There was no wind strong enough to move it. I set the coffee down and stepped closer. Cold air rolled up from below, carrying the familiar smell of damp concrete, old boxes, and something chemical I could never quite place. I flipped the light switch. The single bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered on. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. But I felt, deep in my chest, that something had been there moments before, standing just out of sight. I didn't go down. I closed the door, locked it this time, and returned to my laptop. My hand stayed steady. My thoughts didn't. Living alone that long teaches you the language of silence. You know the difference between an empty house and a house that feels like it's waiting. That morning, the silence had weight. By noon, I hadn't accomplished much. Numbers blurred. My neck ached from tension I hadn't noticed building. I decided to make lunch just to do something normal. I was heating soup on the stove when I heard a voice from the living room. Quiet, almost gentle. Someone said my name, not my full name, the nickname my mother used when I was small. Tommy Bird. I turned off the burner and stood frozen. She called me that because I used to wake up early and sit by the window watching sparrows. She said I chirped like them when I got excited. I hadn't heard that name in over 20 years. The house went silent again. I told myself isolation does things to the mind, that grief lingers in places you don't expect. But deep down, in the part of me that still remembered my mother's voice, I knew what I'd heard. I found him in my mother's old bedroom. I'd kept that door locked since she died. Everything inside remained exactly the way she left it. Her glasses on the nightstand, slippers by the bed, A framed photo of my brother and me at Cedar Point, taken the summer before everything collapsed. The door was open. Sunlight spilled into the hallway, and a man was sitting on her bed. He wore a red flannel shirt identical to one my father used to own. His posture was familiar, shoulders curled inward like he was trying to disappear. When he turned around, my breath caught. The face was close, too close, but wrong. The eyes sat slightly off, the nose bent in a way my father's never had. But when he smiled, it was my father's mouth. He spoke my name in my father's voice. Something inside me fractured. I don't remember grabbing the crowbar from the garage. I remember standing over him afterward, him crying, begging, saying a name that wasn't mine. He didn't sound like my father anymore, and that was enough. When it was over, the house felt calm, cleaner, like it had exhaled. I wrapped him in the bedspread and dragged him to the basement. The dirt floor was soft near the furnace where my father used to hide bottles. It took hours to dig. My hands blistered. My back burned. But I finished. I cleaned everything. Bleach stung my eyes. I burned what I couldn't wash. I told myself I'd defended my home. Anyone would have done the same. She came the next morning. I woke to humming. An old hymn my mother used to hum while cooking. Slightly off key. I found her in the kitchen wearing a blue robe just like my mother's. Her face was almost right. Almost. She smiled and asked if I wanted eggs. I didn't hesitate this time. The neighbors called the police because of the smell. They said it took 2 weeks to notice. I told the officers everything. About the imposters. About the disguises. They didn't congratulate me. They put me in handcuffs. The man was Walter Hensley, a retired electrician with dementia. The woman was Eleanor Kravitz, a widow who checked on neighbors. They weren't wearing my parents' clothes. They were wearing their own. That's what the doctors say. They say isolation broke something in me. They say I'm sick, not evil. Maybe they're right. But sometimes, before dawn, I hear humming in the hallway outside my locked door. And I wonder if the house ever really stopped learning my voice. Nobody ever prepares you for how small you become when you are admitted as a patient. Your clothes are replaced with thin gowns that never quite close. Your schedule, your body, even your pain stops belonging to you. People speak about you while standing right next to your bed, like you are a chart instead of a person. By the time I was transferred to St. Gabriel's Neurological Center in Rochester, Minnesota, I had been living with lupus for nearly 6 years. 6 years of flares. 6 years of medications that helped one organ while quietly damaging another. 6 years of pretending I was still in control. I was 35 years old, married and terrified. My rheumatologist back home in Knoxville, Tennessee, had been honest with me. My kidneys were starting to show signs of involvement. There were neurological symptoms creeping in too. Numbness, tremors, memory lapses that frightened me more than the pain. She wanted me under the care of someone who specialized in autoimmune neurology. That was how I first heard the name Dr. Nathaniel Cross. The name carried weight, published research, prestigious fellowships, training at Johns Hopkins. A reputation so strong that nurses mentioned him in quiet, respectful tones, as if saying his name too loudly might be inappropriate. When I found out he would be my attending physician, I cried. So did my mother. We honestly believed I had been lucky. Dr. Cross was everything you would want at first. Tall, calm, silver just beginning to touch his hair at the temples. His voice never rushed. He listened longer than most doctors ever had. He asked questions that made me feel seen instead of dismissed. During that first week, he visited daily. He explained things carefully, drew diagrams on a tablet, reassured me that my condition was serious, but manageable. He told me he believed in precision medicine, that every patient responded differently, and his job was to tailor care to the individual. I called my husband Aaron every night and told him the same thing. I feel safe here. I meant it. The changes were subtle at first. My evening medication, which I had taken at 8 p.m. for years, started arriving later. Sometimes at 9, sometimes closer to 10. When I asked the nurses, they told me Dr. Cross had adjusted the schedule slightly. Fine. Doctors adjust things all the time. Then one morning I noticed my prednisone pills looked different, smaller, a different shade. I asked about it during rounds. Dr. Cross smiled gently and said they were trialing a refined dosage strategy. He used words like optimization and efficiency. He told me I needed to trust the process. There it was. That phrase. Trust the process. His tone was calm, almost reassuring. But his eyes didn't quite match it. There was no cruelty there, just distance, a kind of clinical detachment that felt selective. The ward housed about 14 patients, almost all women, all dealing with chronic autoimmune conditions. Most of us were long-term admissions, weeks, months. The others adored him. Marisol, in the room across from mine, called him a miracle worker. Paula, who had been there nearly 3 months, said he was the first doctor who ever took her seriously. I wanted to believe them. Still, I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic, just dates, medication times, how I felt afterward. I told myself I was being responsible, not suspicious. The notebook stayed on my bedside table. During my 3rd week, Marisol collapsed. One day she was walking laps with me in the hallway, joking about how terrible the hospital coffee was. The next morning, I woke up to alarms and hurried footsteps. She had gone into acute kidney failure overnight. I watched from my doorway as they rushed her toward the ICU. Dr. Cross was there, his expression grave, his voice low and comforting as he spoke to her panicked sister. He looked like a man carrying a heavy burden. Later that afternoon, when he came to see me, his eyes flicked to my bedside table, to my notebook, just for a second. He asked what I was writing. I told him it was just a journal. He nodded, said that was healthy. But when he left, the notebook was not where I had left it. The pen was on the wrong side. That was when I started paying real attention. I talked more with the other patients, casual conversations, shared frustration, quiet complaints exchanged in hushed voices. What I heard disturbed me. Renee, a woman in her 40s with scleroderma, said her symptoms had worsened since admission. She was losing weight rapidly, couldn't keep food down. Paula admitted she had filed a complaint early on about inconsistent medication. Nothing came of it. Dr. Cross always had an explanation. Charts, data, numbers that made her feel foolish for questioning him. He never raised his voice. He never dismissed concerns outright. He simply buried them under expertise. My own body started to fail around day 19. I woke up with joint pain so severe I couldn't close my hands. My face was swollen. My ankles looked wrong. When I used the bathroom, my urine was dark enough to make my stomach drop. I pressed the call button. It took nearly 40 minutes for someone to come. The nurse looked apologetic. said they were understaffed, promised to page Dr. Cross. He arrived hours later, unhurried. I told him everything. He listened, then said my body was recalibrating. That word. Like I was machinery. When I asked to see my lab results, he gently discouraged it. Said patients reviewing their own charts often created unnecessary anxiety. Trust the process. That night, I didn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I walked to the nurse's station. The ward was quiet in that unnatural hospital way. Fluorescent lights humming, machines breathing for people. The records room door was slightly open. I don't know what pushed me to step inside. Desperation, maybe. My file was thin. Too thin. And wrong. The medication logs did not match what I had been receiving. According to the chart, I was on a standard immunosuppressant protocol. In reality, my doses had been reduced. Quietly. Methodically. I took photos. Then I checked Marisol's file, then Renee's, then Paula's. The pattern was unmistakable. Dosage reductions, medication switches, always justified, always signed, always Dr. Cross. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. I froze. A shadow stopped outside the door. Seconds stretched. Then it moved on. The next morning, Dr. Cross mentioned I had been wandering at night. His voice was pleasant. His eyes were not. It was a warning. I called Aaron and told him everything. He wanted to come immediately. I begged him not to. Insurance. Debt. Fear. Instead, I asked him to contact a lawyer. The retaliation was swift. More tests. More blood drawn. New medications I didn't recognize. I pretended to take them. By evening, I was barely conscious. And I knew, deeply, that what was happening to me wasn't my illness. It was him. Aaron arrived that night anyway. He made noise. He took pictures. He threatened everyone. And suddenly, everything changed. New doctors, new tests, real tests. They found severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, kidney decline. I was transferred 2 days later. Nothing happened to Dr. Nathaniel Cross. The investigation found insufficient evidence. Marisol died 6 weeks later. Renee passed 3 months after discharge. Paula disappeared from the system entirely. Last year, I looked him up. Still practicing. Still smiling. Still deciding. Because the scariest psychopaths don't stalk alleyways. They wear white coats. And they decide who deserves to heal. April 2018. If someone had told me that month would quietly erase the life I spent a decade building, I would have laughed. I was 36 years old, living just outside Franklin, Tennessee, in a modest 2-story home with a peeling white porch railing that I always meant to repaint. I worked in downtown Nashville at a mid-sized accounting firm called Hollis and Reed Financial, where I had survived long enough to believe survival meant safety. 10 years. That number meant something to me. I had started there straight out of college, bottom rung, cubicle by the copy machine, coffee-stained spreadsheets and supervisors who didn't remember my name. I stayed late. I came in early. I fixed messes nobody wanted to claim. Slowly, quietly, I climbed. By 2018, I was a senior account manager. Trusted, reliable. The guy they sent in when a client relationship was bleeding out. I had survived 2 layoffs and 3 department restructures. My annual reviews used words like dependable, steady, indispensable. At home, life finally felt settled. My son had just turned 7. My wife, Marianne, and I were talking about upgrading from starter home to forever home. The student loans were gone. The credit card balances were manageable. For the first time in my adult life, the future didn't feel like something chasing me with a knife. I believed in the system. Show up, work hard, keep your head down, and eventually the company takes care of you. I even had my eye on the corner office on the 4th floor, the one with the view of the Cumberland River. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought I had earned it. That was before she arrived. Our department head, Ronald Pierce, announced his early retirement at the end of March. Heart trouble, he said. I suspected exhaustion had finally won. He had mentored me since my 2nd year, a blunt but fair man who believed competence mattered more than politics. His replacement came fast. Her name was Victoria Hale. She transferred in from a larger firm based in Charlotte, North Carolina, with glowing references and an internal recommendation that practically sparkled. She was early 40s, always impeccably dressed, neutral colors, tailored jackets, calm posture. Her voice never rose. Her smile never slipped. During her first week, she scheduled one-on-one meetings with every team member. When it was my turn, she asked about my career goals, my family, how long I'd been with the company. She remembered my son's name. She took notes. I walked out of that meeting thinking, this might actually be good. I didn't know I had just participated in an interview where I was the subject, not the candidate. The first crack was so small, I almost ignored it. 3 weeks in, I was managing the Brenwick Logistics account, a high-maintenance client notorious for sudden changes and impossible timelines. Victoria emailed me on a Tuesday, asking for a progress update. By the end of the week, I delivered it Thursday afternoon, early. The following Monday, during a team meeting, she casually mentioned concern about the Brenwick timeline. She said she'd requested the update by Wednesday and received it late. I opened my mouth to correct her. She had already moved on. Her tone was light, unbothered, as if the detail barely mattered. After the meeting, I checked my inbox. The email clearly said Friday. I hovered over forward, ready to clarify politely, then stopped. Instead, I took a screenshot. I told myself I was being cautious, maybe paranoid. I created a folder on my desktop and named it Notes. That folder would eventually become my lifeline. 2 weeks later, I was called into a meeting with Victoria and HR. The HR representative, Caleb Monroe, looked like he hadn't slept. He kept adjusting his tie, eyes darting between us. Victoria spoke first. She said a coworker had expressed discomfort over comments I had allegedly made regarding workload distribution. She didn't specify the comments. She wouldn't say who complained. Confidentiality, she said warmly. She assured me she wasn't accusing me of anything, just keeping me informed, wanting to maintain a healthy work environment. I sat there stunned. The only person I had ever vented to was Marc Ellison, my closest work friend. And those conversations were nothing more than generic complaints every accountant makes during tax season. When I tried to ask for clarification, Victoria smiled. "I'm sure it was a misunderstanding," she said. "Let's just move forward." Caleb nodded without meeting my eyes. I left feeling like I had been accused of something unnamed and convicted without a trial. After that, once I knew what to look for, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Emails about projects I was leading stopped including me. Then I'd be questioned about why I hadn't contributed to discussions I didn't know existed. Meeting times changed without notice. I'd arrived to find everyone already deep in conversation. Victoria would offer a sympathetic smile and say she thought someone had told me. My access to shared files vanished, blamed on a system glitch that took weeks to fix. I overheard whispers near the elevator. Conversation stopped when I approached. Marc finally told me that Victoria had mentioned I was going through some personal challenges and that the team should be patient. Personal challenges. I hadn't told her anything because there was nothing to tell. She was inventing a version of me and distributing it carefully. Explaining it to Marianne was the hardest part. Every complaint sounded petty out loud. Deadlines changed. Emails went missing. People acted strange. She listened. She suggested miscommunication, disorganization, adjustment pains, and I saw the doubt creep in. I stopped talking about it. That's how it works. Isolation first, silence second, self-doubt last. By June, my folder contained over 40 screenshots, emails, and time-stamped notes. I showed them to Marc one evening after everyone else left. His face shifted as he scrolled. Confusion, recognition, fear. He admitted Victoria had asked him questions about my attitude, my reliability. She framed it as concern, wanting to support a struggling employee. Then he told me the part that made my stomach drop. She had suggested I might be dealing with substance issues. Marc had pushed back, said it didn't fit. Victoria thanked him for his loyalty. Loyalty. As if truth was optional. I went to HR. I bypassed Victoria and met directly with Elaine Porter, the head of human resources, someone who had known me for years. I laid everything out. The documentation, the contradictions, the pattern. Elaine listened quietly. When I finished, she thanked me and said she would look into it. Then she asked if I'd been feeling overwhelmed lately, if everything was okay at home. In that moment, I understood. Victoria had already been there. I wasn't reporting a problem. I was confirming a diagnosis. The office changed after that. People avoided me. Conversation stopped when I approached. Even Marc pulled away. He finally admitted Victoria had held a private meeting while I was out, expressing concern for my mental health and asking the team to document unusual behavior. She framed it as protection. Everyone became a witness waiting for evidence. I stopped sleeping. I made real mistakes, and every mistake fed the machine. The end came on a humid July afternoon. Victoria called me into her office. She spoke gently, used words like mutual, supportive, transition. 10 years erased in 10 minutes. I asked her why. She looked at me, and for just a moment, something cold flickered behind her eyes. Then she smiled. She said she only wanted to help. That was the truth. She had, just not me. I didn't fight it. I took the severance, signed the silence. 6 months later, I rebuilt my life elsewhere. But sometimes, late at night, I think about her, and I wonder who she's smiling at now. That winter, my life had shrunk into something small and repetitive. I lived in a town called Coldwater Ridge, tucked deep into the Midwest, the kind of American town people pass through without ever remembering the name. 2 stoplights, 1 main road, a diner that doubled as the town's living room. Everyone recognized your truck long before they remembered who you were. After a rough year, I wasn't trying to stand out. I worked long shifts at a farm and hardware supply store, stacking feed bags, unloading shipments, counting inventory until my hands smelled like dust and metal. I was saving money, keeping my head down, and telling myself routine was safety. Most days followed the same rhythm. Wake before sunrise, drive the same cracked road, greet the same faces, go home tired but unbothered. People in Coldwater Ridge valued predictability. Anything that broke routine got noticed fast. I thought that made the town safe. Looking back now, that sense of safety was just an illusion built on habit. I didn't have many friends, just co-workers I nodded to, neighbors I waved at from my porch. The town itself felt frozen in time, like nothing truly bad could happen there, because nothing ever really happened at all. That was where Marcus came in. Everyone knew Marcus, not because he did anything important, but because he was always there. He spent most of his time at Lowe's Corner Diner, the small family-owned place next to the supply store. If you needed to know what was going on in town, you didn't check the news. You ate breakfast there. Marcus stood out without trying. Same faded jacket year-round. Same loud laugh that came a second too early, before anyone else reacted. He hovered near booths he wasn't invited to, chiming in on conversations that weren't his. He wasn't threatening, just awkward. At least, that's what we told ourselves. I noticed he stared at people longer than normal, not in a confused way, not in a friendly way. It was like he was studying reactions, how people smiled politely, how they shifted uncomfortably, how they looked away. It made my skin crawl, but in a town like ours, discomfort got filed under eccentric. Marcus was just another odd character. Over time, the complaints started. At first, they were whispers. Waitresses mentioning he wouldn't take hints. Regulars complaining he always sat at their booth. Someone said he followed them outside once, still talking when the conversation had clearly ended. The diner owners tried being polite, then firm, then direct. One afternoon, Marcus refused to leave. He caused a scene over a seat he claimed was his, raised his voice, accused people of disrespecting him. The owners finally called the local sheriff. Word spread before the patrol car even left the lot. Marcus was escorted out and told not to come back. I remember seeing him later that day, pacing near the parking lot. His face was red, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He muttered to himself, pointing at the windows where people ate like nothing had happened. There was something about the way he looked at that building that made my chest tighten, like he was nursing a wound nobody else could see. Still, most of us assumed he'd fade out of our routines. We were wrong. The morning everything happened started like any other. Gray sky, cold air that bit at your ears, the town waking up slow. I stopped at the diner before work, thinking only about coffee and eggs. Inside, plates clinked. Conversation stayed low. The smell of grease and burnt coffee hung heavy. A few regulars joked about how peaceful it felt without Marcus around. Nervous laughter followed. I remember thinking how calm everyone seemed, as if removing a problem from sight meant removing it completely. None of us realized how much anger had been building outside our routines, waiting for a reason to come back inside. I had just finished eating when the front door flew open. The bell rang sharp and uneven. Marcus stood there. He looked thinner, like something had been stripped away during the weeks he'd been gone. His jacket was missing, replaced by a dark hoodie that didn't quite fit, sleeves hanging too long past his wrists. He didn't look around for a seat. He scanned the room slowly, not searching, counting. The chatter died. Forks froze midair. Even the grill seemed to hiss quieter. The smell of coffee suddenly felt sour, like the air itself had changed. No one greeted him. No one told him to leave. Marcus started talking, not shouting at first. He spoke with certainty, naming people one by one like he was reading from a list. He accused them of laughing at him, of pretending he didn't exist, of thinking they were better than him. His voice cracked, then steadied. Each time it came back sharper. His eyes were glassy but focused, locked onto faces that had already forgotten him. When someone told him to calm down, he laughed. It didn't match the moment. That's when he reached inside his hoodie. The room collapsed into noise. Chairs scraped back. Someone screamed. A few people bolted for the side door. The sound that followed wasn't like movies. It wasn't clean or dramatic. It was loud, chaotic, echoing in ways that made your brain struggle to keep up. I dropped behind the counter without thinking. From where I crouched, I saw Marcus's shoes pacing back and forth. Slow, steady, like he was following a plan. He talked between the noise, rambling about respect, about being ignored, about how everyone would remember him now. Glass shattered. Something metallic hit tile. Time stopped behaving normally. It stretched, snapped, folded in on itself. Eventually, sirens cut through everything. Marcus's pacing stopped. His voice faded into muttering, then silence. When officers rushed in, shouting commands, the diner looked wrong. Smoke hung low. Chairs lay overturned like bodies. I stayed on the floor until someone touched my shoulder and told me it was over. Outside, the cold air burned my lungs. The town didn't look familiar anymore. People stood in clusters, crying, staring, trying to process something with no clean explanation. Red and blue lights bounced off storefront windows like a warning nobody had listened to. In the days that followed, Coldwater Ridge moved in a muted rhythm. People spoke softly. Doors closed gently. News vans came and went. The diner stayed shuttered, windows covered with brown paper. Everyone replayed memories, wondering which small interaction had mattered more than they thought. I kept seeing Marcus's eyes as he counted faces. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it brought fragments of sound and light that snapped me awake. Conversations felt heavy, full of things nobody knew how to say. Authorities released information slowly. They talked about complaints, about fixation, about grievance and isolation, about how Marcus had been warned, removed, ignored. What hit me hardest was learning how often he'd returned after being banned, standing outside the diner, watching people eat. He kept notes: who sat where, who avoided eye contact, who laughed. None of it sounded like madness the way people imagine it, just obsession left alone for too long. When the diner reopened weeks later, it felt heavier inside. The layout had changed. New glass, different tables. Like rearranging things could erase what happened. Some regulars never came back. Others sat silently, eyes down. The owners thanked everyone for returning, voices tight with emotion. Sitting there, I realized how easily routine hides danger, how comfort turns into blindness. Marcus didn't appear out of nowhere. He was built slowly, quietly, while we looked away. I still live here, still work nearby, but I pay attention differently now. This town healed enough to function, but it never returned to what it was. Some things, once broken, don't disappear. They just settle into a new shape,